Gianna, I love that the place you're starting is purpose, because it's true, without having a real motivation and drive to do any of the things that we do, we're never going to do them with excellence, and also, just as importantly, we're not going to be able to do them in the long term. I've been a teacher now for 15 years, and I've taken on a bunch of different roles within that time. And in terms of the thing that is my purpose, I've always thought about the singular power of learning, of education, of schools, to be able to change the lives of individuals, but also of communities. I am the child of migrants. I was born here in Australia, but my parents came here in the 70s, absolutely with the goal of giving my brother and sister and I, all of whom were born here, the opportunity to reach an education that would change our lives, and it really has. And education continues to be something which transforms people's opportunities, the trajectories of where their lives are headed. And I think, honestly, that is what firstly started me off on this journey. But it's also what continues to motivate me when I think about the students who I teach on a day-to-day basis. And I am old enough and have been doing this long enough that I've had ex-students come visit me back at school, and I get to hear about the places that they are going, what they're doing with the knowledge and skills that I played a small part in helping them to develop. So that, I think, is the drive. Students is another way of saying it. They're always the motivating factor. And seeing you here is just such an exciting moment for me, because I do a lot of work nowadays with teachers supporting students, but being able to do this directly, it's just an absolute highlight. It's quite funny when I think about it, because you're right, when you list it out, like, I don't think about my life. I don't get up in the morning and like look in the mirror and I'm like, yes, here I am, the person who does all of those things. And I guess most of us don't do that either. But the most important thing, I think, to start off that answer with is, I am privileged and very thankful to work with lots of amazing people. Anyone who does lots of brilliant things in their life, they're able to do that through collaboration. And collaboration is a bit of a funny buzzword. It's like, oh yeah, I'm really collaborative, right? But what that really means is, I feel very thankful that over the last several years, I've been able to build connections and form relationships, professional and personal, with people who make me better, who help me learn things. I am still learning. There's so many things I'm like, yeah, I don't know anything about that. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got was to surround myself with people who are smarter than me. And I could spend the entire rest of this podcast listing all the people I've learned from and the people who I get to work with today, who are the reason why I can achieve, lead teams, I can support pre-service teachers, I can write books or host TV shows. All of those things, I mean, we're in a room right now that perfectly exemplifies this, come from the support of fantastic teams.
Wow.
Numeracy and mathematics inform one another, and they overlap, but they are distinct. I mean, mathematics is the study of patterns, numbers, and relationships, and a lot of things fit under that heading. But it's important to notice that several things which you would fit under the category of mathematics, they're just kind of interesting, abstract. They seem to have nothing really to do with the real world, because you can actually not just find patterns out there in the universe, you can just make patterns, you can just create, you can imagine. And so mathematics actually is, in that way, a bit like an art, right? It's not just a discipline to be studied that's useful. It's something which we can use to invent and imagine. But lots of mathematics is designed to solve problems that matter to us. Lots of mathematics is connected to our everyday life, or perhaps our work, and that kind of mathematics is numeracy. So when I think about, for example, if I'm going to the shops and I am catering for a Christmas party, I've got to do some calculation, but I've also got to estimate some things, and I've got to sort of put that together with all of the other complicated bits of like, oh, who are the people who are coming to my party? What kinds of things do I enjoy eating? And so if I fit all that together in the problem I'm trying to solve, that's numeracy. Mathematics is a part of it, so you can see they relate, but they're not the same thing. I am a mathematics teacher, and I'm also hugely involved in numeracy. It really matters to me because, as we just mentioned, because by definition, it's super practical. It's stuff that we can all use every day. However, I'm not going to say, like, mathematics itself, even the bits that it might seem aren't connected, they're also really important. I'll give you two reasons. Number one, sometimes just the ability to think logically through something, regardless of whether it has a practical context or not, is really important. So when we think about how to deductively reason through and logically come up with a solution, that's something which is actually easier to do when you're not in the messiness of the real world. So there's a place for that mathematics which you don't necessarily think, oh, I'm going to use this tomorrow, right? There's still an importance to that. The other thing is that it seems like I'm putting it into two categories, right? The maths that's useful and then the mathematics that's just kind of interesting, right? The technical names for those are maths can be applied or it's pure. Pure and applied maths are two sort of big fields of mathematics at university that people who go to uni and study maths will find out about. But the dangerous thing is some things you might think are just pure and have no relationship to anything eventually become applied. We just didn't realize it. My favorite example of this is prime numbers. You guys know what prime numbers are, right?
Unfortunately.
Yes, you've learned about these in the past. So things like 5, 7, 11, 13. So you can't break up these numbers into nice, neat groups, right? Prime numbers were studied at the beginning, centuries ago, because they were just interesting. And everyone was like, you can't do anything with these prime numbers. They're cute, right? You can't solve any problems with them. Except in the 1960s, some people came along and invented this little thing you might have heard of called the internet. Now, the way the internet works that we rely on every single day is that information, sometimes really private, secure information, it can only get from one person to another by being copied many, many times, right? From your phone to a, cell tower to a server, on and on and on and on around the world. How is it the things that are private to you, like your passwords or credit card numbers or things like that, how do we keep them secure to us? And the answer is we actually use those prime numbers I was mentioning before to encrypt and decrypt all of that and keep it safe in a way that I think is amazing. We thought it was pure, didn't have anything to do with anything, but is deeply applied in the end. I have thankfully had so many examples of great teaching that I've learned from down the years. And some of them were when I was a student myself, and others of them are people I've discovered as colleagues and have learned from them. So in terms of where it all comes from, I think it is sort of learned in part from all of these people, and not just like formal educators, but even say, my mum was a person who taught me so much about relating to people, help them learn skills, and doing that in an empathetic way, right? And in the same way, we learn by counterexample as well. So not all of my teachers have been amazing examples that I'd want to say, yes, I want to be exactly like that. When I was going through primary school, I actually had several years that were very difficult for me. And even part of that was not just how I was treated by my peers, but even some of my teachers who I went through when I was in like year 2, year 3, as someone who had an unfamiliar looking face and was very different culturally to most of the people who I grew up with, there was just some difficult experiences from when I was younger that taught me this is not the kind of teacher that I want to become. And I know the huge influence that I get to have personally on my students because of the positive and the negatives that I have learned. And so I guess, that energy that I bring to the classroom that you just alluded to before, where that comes from, I guess, is the several teachers who've taught me. If they're not interested in something, then why should I be interested, right? And I view it as a duty and responsibility every time I walk into the classroom to be able to say, okay, I have to know why I care about this so that I can help my students see why this is important, it's valuable, why it's something which you ought to think is worthy of your time. And if I can't think of that for myself, then I still have work to do.